I have 12 emails, 30 messages, and a proposal due by 10. How am I already underwater?
I'm in the same boat.
I'm in an actual boat.
Hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use Emmet in order to write HTML and CSS faster. And by the end of this video, I guarantee you're going to be writing HTML at least twice as fast as you were before, which is going to drastically increase the speed you can create projects. So let's get started now. But before we get started, I want to tell you how to get completely free, powerful hosting for an entire year. And that's by using Atlantic.net, which is the sponsor for today's video. They're giving away an entire year for free of their hosting on a really powerful server. This is twice as powerful as the entry-level server for most other VPSs. So I highly recommend you check out Atlantic.net to take advantage of additional credit. So make sure you go to Atlantic.net, linked in the description, and use the code Kyle. Now on with the video. To get started, I have a blank HTML page open inside of Visual Studio Code, and Emmet is actually built into Visual Studio Code, so we can start using Emmet immediately as long as you're in an HTML page. And by far, the most used Emmet shortcut that I use personally is when you type exclamation point and hit enter, and it generates all of this boilerplate HTML for you. This is actually part of Emmet. And what Emmet is it's essentially a bunch of different shortcuts and snippets where you type a small amount of code, for example, that exclamation point, and it'll generate a bunch of code for you by just typing a small amount of information. And it's really powerful when it comes to creating complex HTML. For example, we have this exclamation point, which generates all this boilerplate document for us, but we can also generate any HTML tag that we want. For example, if we want to make a span, we just type span, hit enter, and it's going to enter in all these brackets for us, the opening, the closing tags, everything we need. Same thing, we can do div, we can do any tag that we want. We could do an A tag, for example, and as you see, it automatically populates this href for us and puts the cursor right in the middle of it, since it knows an anchor tag needs to have some form of href. And we can do this with pretty much any tag that you can think of, for example, button, and so on. And the list goes on, and that alone will already save you twice the time because you don't have to type the closing portion, you only have to type that opening word to get that tag generated. But you can actually do much more. If we wanted, for example, a span that has the class of purple, we just put our element, span, and then dot and the class we want, just like if you made a CSS selector. And when we generate that, you see it creates that class with purple. Obviously, we can do the same thing with IDs. We just type in the ID we want after that pound symbol, and it'll generate that for us. You can almost think of Emmet as writing out CSS inside of your HTML, and when you hit enter, it'll generate the HTML for that CSS selector. And we could do, for example, div with a class of class 1, and another class of class 2 with an ID of ID 1. And as you can see, it generates all of that information for us, which is really D of ID 1. And as you can see, it generates all of that information for us, which is really powerful. On top of that, something that Emmet does is that it knows the div is the most common element that you're going to use. So if you have a div that you want to create, you don't even need to type div. You can just start typing your class, and it'll automatically assume that you want a div. So we could do an ID as well, and it'll automatically assume that we wanted an ID. So we just had to put that period along with the class name, or we could put, for example, the hashtag and the rest of our ID name that we want, and it's just going to assume you want a div. It would be exactly the same as if you put div in front of these different selectors. So that's a really powerful way just to write up basic HTML. For example, when you want a link, you could type in link, hit enter, it automatically assumes it's a style sheet, gives you the href, saves you a bunch of time. So let's clear all of that out. And on top of adding classes and IDs, we can also add attributes. So for example, if we had a button and we wanted this button to be the type equal to button, we could just type that out just like this, just like it was CSS selector, hit enter, and you can see it creates a button with the type of a button here. We could also do a div. So we could just say that we wanted a div to have data selected, hit enter, and you can see it generated that for us. And the way that this works, if we have a button with the type of a button here. We could also do a div. So we could just say that we wanted a div to have data selected, hit enter, and you can see it generated that for us. And the way that this works, if we just go back to this, it automatically assumes that we want a div since we didn't put any selector of an element in front. And since we wrote out this attribute, it's going to generate us a div with that attribute. And we can even combine this attribute stuff. So we could say data selected, and we want to do it for the class of active, And there we go. Now we have a div with data selected and a class of active, and it even puts our cursor right here in the data selected. And when we hit tab, it moves us into the div. It's really powerful, and I love Emmet for creating these basic elements, but it can do so much more than just creating these basic elements. For example, we can actually create children elements. So let's say that we wanted to create a div, and we wanted to give it the class of, for example, purple. And inside of that div, we wanted to have a span. In CSS, in order to select a child element, you use this greater than symbol here. So we're just going to use that greater than symbol, saying that we have a child of our div, which is a span with the class of cyan. And now as you can see, we have a div with the class purple, and inside that, we have a span with the class of cyan. That's really powerful. And we can do, for example, of our div, which is a span with the class of cyan. And now as you can see, we have a div with the class purple, and inside that, we have a span with the class of cyan. That's really powerful. And we can do, for example, we want a header, and inside that header, we want to have a nav. Inside that nav, we want a UL. And now, if we try to hit enter on this, it's going to generate us out a header with a nav inside of it and a UL inside of that. That's really powerful. But we can take this a step further and actually do multiplication, because what if we wanted a bunch of LIs inside of this UL? Well, we can say that we want some child of LIs, and we want, for example, 3 of them. We just put the multiplication sign, this star symbol.
Do you know that React requires less coding and has more functionality compared to other libraries of JavaScript? This is the reason why most...
And 3, and that's saying that we now want 3 LIs inside of our UL. And when we hit enter, you see we have these 3 LIs, and if I type information and hit tab, it moves me to the next LI and the next LI, which is awesome. And on top of that, if we go back to this, we can actually add text inside of these LIs. By using the curly brackets, anything you put inside of them is going to be text that goes inside the element. So we just put a bunch of random text. If we hit enter, you can see all of our LIs are pre-populated with that text. But what if we wanted to count? For example, we wanted li1 to say 1, li2 to say 2, and li3 to say 3. Well, what we can do is use the dollar symbol. This allows us to put numbers inside of our text. So we could say list, item, and then $. And what this is going to do is it's going to generate out text inside our LIs that says list item, and then the number that we're on, so 1, 2, or 3. And if we hit enter, you can see we get list item 1, list item 2, and list item 3. And the great thing about this $sign is we can even use it for classes. We could say, for example, class, and then put $sign, and now what's going to happen is it's going to say class 1, class 2, and class 3. So if we move our cursor to the end here, hit enter, you can see we get class 1, class 2, class 3, and list item 1, list item 2, and list item 3. And the great thing is if we add additional $signs in here, it's going to essentially zero pad our number. So if we have $2 signs, you can see we now get a 2-digit number, 01, 02, 03, and that's really powerful and really great if you wanted to do larger list, for example, and you wanted to zero pad your numbers. Something else that you can do with Emmet is create siblings. So instead of just making children, so a header that has a child of a nav with a child of a UL and a child of an LI, we can actually create siblings. So let's remove all of this code for now. Let's say we want to create a shell of a document where we have a header, a main, and then a footer. But we could create our header, and in CSS, we know that the plus symbol is used for siblings, and it's the same thing in Emmet, so we use plus. Then we want a main, so we have a header that has a sibling that's a main, and then another plus, and we have a sibling of a footer. And when I hit enter here, you can see we get a header with a main and a footer, and they're all siblings. There are no children involved in this situation. But what if we wanted to add a child of a nav to our header? Well, if we go back, we know that we use the greater than symbol here, and then we type in nav, But this is actually going to generate slightly different markup than you would think. If we hit enter, you can see everything is a child of header. And that's because when we have this child selector, now everything after it is a child of the thing that came before it, in our case, this header. So in order to navigate upwards, essentially exit out of this header, what we can do is use this caret symbol, which allows us to climb up. It says, right now we're in the child of the header for this nav. Now we want to climb up. So now we no longer are inside this header. And if we hit enter, you can see we get the markup that we want. But I find this climb up operator to be kind of confusing to work with. So instead, I like to use the grouping characters. So what we can do is wrap this header and nav section inside of parentheses, and now it's saying that these are grouped together, just like order of operations when it comes to math. So what it's saying is that this nav is a child of this header, but after that, we're assuming that this main is no longer a child of this nav. It's not in that group. So what we're going to get is the same markup we had before. As you can see, we have a nav and a header, and then our main and our footer. And the reason this works is because we're grouping up our child operators so that these child operators of this greater than symbol isn't leaking out to everything that comes after the nav, because none of that stuff is inside this group. So now let's do a little bit of an exercise where we want to create a header, and inside that header, we're going to have a heading for an H2, as well as a nav that has an ordered list with 5 items inside of it, and we're also going to have a main and a footer on the outside of that. So in order to do that, the first thing we know is we want our header, and inside that header, we want to have a nav and an H2. So we're going to have an H2 with some text that'll say heading, and then adjacent to that, we're going to have our nav, and then inside of our nav, we're going to have an ordered list, and inside of that, we're going to have our 5 LIs. And then inside of these LIs, since these are actually links, we want to make sure we have anchor tags, and the anchor tags are going to have the text, which is just going to say link and then $sign. Now if we go to the end here, and we actually run this, as you can see, we got a header with a heading of H2 right here, our nav with our ordered list, and each one of those, as you can see, it's going to say link and then $sign. Now if we go to the end here, and we actually run this, which is just going to say link and then $sign. Now if we go to the end here, and we actually run this, as you can see, we got a header with a heading of H2 right here, our nav with our ordered list. We run this next, which is just going to say link and then $sign. Now if we go to the end here and we actually run this, as you can see, we got a header with a heading of H2 right here, our nav with our ordered list, and each one of those has a link inside of it, inside of a list item, and then outside of here we have our main and our footer. So this is a really powerful way to generate some boilerplate HTML for your document. Another example of something we could do would be, for example, a form. So we could say that we have a form. We're going to make this one a post form.
10 साल तक हर महीने 30,000 पर मंथ इन्वेस्ट करो और 20 साल बाद रिटायरमेंट पे पाओ 3.5.
So if we do